we were there for a medical mission, and I just remember her sitting on the side of the road, and I'm like, why are you sitting here? And she's like, because I can't go to school. And I said, why can't you go to school? She's like, I can't pay for school. I was like, why don't you go to public school? But then in the end, I'm like realizing that she doesn't go to school because she can't pay for school, and there's no other way to learn. And for me, in my kind of semi-naive, entitled like brain, it didn't even occur to me that there were kids in the world that didn't go to school. You know, for me, education was a basic right. Like in America, we're lucky because even the kids who are low income have an opportunity to go to school. Like it's not a question. But in Haiti, because of the weak education infrastructure, if you don't have money, you don't go to school.
Welcome to the In Spirit podcast from Amoris Christi. Join us as we explore current events and all manner of fascinating topics and explore their connections to Christian living.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the In Spirit podcast. It's a joy and privilege to welcome a good friend of mine, Brian Mundackal. He's the Executive Director of Lumen Vitae, a nonprofit that works with education in Haiti mainly, educating over 1,400 children across 5 cities in Haiti. And so it's such a joy. Brian, thanks for joining us today.
What's going on, guys?
What's going on? Thanks
Happy Feast of St. Joseph.
That's true.
That's right. We're recording
true.
this on the Feast of St. Joseph.
That's true. And it is I thought it was really beautiful that we could record this on the Feast of St. Joseph. But how you guys been? How was your week, Brian?
I mean, St. Joseph's feast is kind of special. Adoptive father of Jesus.
Yeah.
Can't beat it. Can't beat it. Well, I guess the Annunciation kind of beats it in a week, but until then, we're riding the grace waves.
Yeah. Brian's father 3, one more on the way. So beautiful times now.
That's right.
Yeah. How about you, Chris? How was your week?
Pretty good. I was thinking about how St. Joseph is a man who never spoke, and we often talk about Joseph's silence. So in honor of St. Joseph's feast today, we're going to yap for an hour.
Nice. What's your favorite title for St. Joseph? It's probably the same.
I think everyone likes Terror of Demons.
Yes, it doesn't get better than that. Come on.
All right, so I thought today we'll talk about the topic of poverty alleviation through education and family. And I know, Brian, you've worked in this field since 2016, 17, and even before, actually, in that field of education, of helping children through education. And so, we just wanted to talk a little bit about it, of how that makes an impact in poverty and in the lives of people.
We talk about poverty very often as Christians. We talk about, the importance of like spiritual poverty, the importance of serving the poor. But we wanted to hone in the topic a little bit today and talk specifically about like the alleviation of poverty in general, and really the role that education in particular plays in that. So, maybe just to set the scene here, like what are the different kinds of poverty that we see around us in the world today? Yeah,
I mean, first off, I guess I'll just say, like, I'm really not an expert in any of these fields. I'm kind of this guy who went to Haiti and saw some crazy things. And when I went back to my day job, I couldn't sit still. And it kept bothering me that people were suffering the way that they were suffering. And I talked to people and I told them I wanted to do something, and some people encouraged me, and we started dreaming, and that's kind of how I ended up at this place 7 years later. So I hope you're not expecting an expert analysis of poverty and education. I honestly don't.
But just speaking from your own experience of how you've seen it impact and change people's lives, basically, is what we thought, and exploring it together. Yeah.
So maybe then to start, like, since we're talking about it from your personal perspective, when you went to Haiti, in a broad way, what were the different forms of poverty that you saw there that like stayed with you?
Yeah, I mean, Haiti was really different for me. I was lucky enough that, when I was in my mid-20s, I was working a day job in finance. But then my brother plugged me into the Missionaries of Charity in the South Bronx. And so that was like the first house that Mother Teresa started when she came to America. And so for like 3 or 4 years, I was living there on a weekly basis, just helping the guys who needed a place to stay at night. And so really kind of dealing with some like the toughest areas of poverty in New York. And, basically what you saw was a lot of people struggling with addiction to alcohol and drugs, but then also like a ton of mental health issues where people just like couldn't be with their families. And so for them, the easiest route was just to be by themselves on the street. And so it was really a mixed bag. But, the beautiful thing about America is there are like opportunities like food stamps, there's like housing and different stuff. And so, we're just super blessed to live in a country where we do have certain efforts that the government puts into helping people. And so when I went to Haiti, it was like a totally different reality where it was like the vast majority of people were really suffering. And it's not just like suffering, but like, for me, when I saw it, like the only word that I could use to describe it was misery, like it's what the church calls like destitution, like utter poverty, where people really don't have the basic means of toilets and kitchens and rooms.
Right.
Basically people are living in a box.
Right. Food, water, shelter, medicine.
Yeah, both of you guys have been there, so you guys
Yeah.
know what it's like.
We've all been there at the same time, even.
That's right. That's right.
True. We did a retreat together.
Yeah, and so seeing that was, I don't know, like it sent like shock waves down my spine, because like I said, like I've been to New York, I've been to the South Bronx, I saw like some of the worst poverty in America, and it didn't even come close to kind of like the suffering that people were going through here. And that's obviously material poverty, but I'll never forget this moment of kind of being, we were in Chicago actually, and we were passing out sandwiches. We were with Father Melvin, I think you guys know him, and a bunch of people, and just passing out sandwiches to homeless people. And I remember this one lady, it's like something that I can never etch out of my head. And I was just trying to talk to her, see how her day was and all this kind of stuff. And like, she was saying like, yeah, people just don't see me. Like, like they walk by me every day and it's as though like I don't exist.
Yeah.
And it's like the material poverty in Haiti is crazy, but then imagine like this kind of poverty where like, because you're poor and so many other people have the means, you kind of just become like invisible or non-existent or not important. And I don't know what type of poverty that is, but like that's a terrible feeling.
Yeah.
And then you have like spiritual poverty, which is like the worst of all. And it happens in every country and in every place where, in all of these years and the journey that I've been through, the biggest treasure that I've received is just to know Christ and to be loved by him and to love others. And, if that's the greatest treasure that I've experienced, and I've met tons of people who also see that as their greatest treasure, to not have that is just like gospel spiritual poverty. Like that's the thing that I want the most in this world. And if so many people are deprived of that, that's a terrible, terrible thing to not have, to have faith and community and to be able to worship. Those are some of the most important things to me. So, there's so many different types of poverty.
You saw it all in Haiti in some way or another.
Yeah. And I think it's beautiful how you've had these, different experiences from here, from your church, from growing up.
It's very eye-opening.
Yeah. And from Haiti. And then, you kind of in a way responded to that through this initiative of education in Lumen Vitae. And, it makes me think of like the providence of why God brought those different experiences in your life and how you responded to that providence to bring out this beautiful organization of Lumen Vitae. Could you share a little bit about why you thought education was a response to the poverty that you encountered in Haiti, the material poverty?
Sure, yeah. like you make it sound like some like really noble choice, but for me it really wasn't a choice. There were a few encounters that I had when I was in Haiti that, like I said, they were just etched in my brain. Like one was meeting this young girl who at the time she was probably like 7 or 8. And I remember like we were there for a medical mission, and I just remember her sitting on the side of the road, and I'm like, why are you sitting here? And she's like, because I can't go to school. And I said, why can't you go to school? She's like, I can't pay for school. And I was like, why don't you go to public school? And I mean, she doesn't speak English, but this is like a 30-minute effort to try to like extract whatever little words I understood. But then in the end, I'm like realizing that she doesn't go to school because she can't pay for school, and there's no other way to learn. And for me, in my kind of semi-naive, entitled like brain, it didn't even occur to me that there were kids in the world that didn't go to school. For me, education was a basic right. Like in America, we're lucky because even the kids who are low income have an opportunity to go to school. Like it's not a question. But in Haiti, because of the weak education infrastructure, if you don't have money, you don't go to school. And it sounds tough, but then when you meet 40, 50-year-old women who, if you ask them to write their name, they draw a cross, and that's like their name because they don't know how to read and write. And when you think about their reality where they're walking into the market every day, can't read a sign, like don't know how to write things, like that's tragic. Yeah. That's super tragic. And it's just like, how does that exist?
Yeah, and I'd like to hone in on that a little bit too, because education, if we want to be really abstract, we could call it an intellectual poverty, which, I think we're used to thinking of, like we all probably learn about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah. You've got like the basic physical needs, and then the intellectual needs, and then the social and the spiritual. And when you break it into that like very neat hierarchy, it looks very neat. But a lot of times, like the reality is it's a lot messier. Like it's not that like, okay, once we solve the hunger, then we'll take care of their minds. And then once like it's much more like muddled together. And like with education, I think the temptation might be, or I don't know if you've heard this, maybe like, oh, well, shouldn't we be taking care of something more immediate? Shouldn't we be taking care of something like more like kind of short term, like, I don't want to use the word like instant gratification, but that idea of like, we just, we need to solve this quickly. Like, does that, I don't know, have you heard that? Has that come up?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's kind of the $1 million question is like, do you try to satisfy people's short-term needs like food and water and shelter, or do you try to address their long-term needs, which, sometimes like education is one of them, skills, training, all those kind of stuff. And it's tough because, the reality is like, if a kid is hungry, like how well is he going to be able to learn?
Right.
Yeah. Not very well.
They're going to go together no matter what.
Yeah. And so there's a reality, but, for the group of us, when we started Lumen Vitae, one of the convictions was that when you give someone a meal, they're always just going to be dependent on you to get that meal. Yeah. Right? Versus if you give someone an education, that's something that can never be taken from them. Like obviously, you could say coma, all that. Obviously, there's like extremes and stuff. But in general, when you educate someone, that's a forever investment. And the hope is that they could use that to make some money for their families, and for the ones who really take advantage of it, they become leaders in society, they become politicians, they become all these kind of people that can actually make an impact, and
Changers
not only
of society,
and not just feed themselves, but feed the other people around them.
Right. A bit of a like teach a man to fish sort of a thing. Yeah. And some of our listeners might not be familiar with all of the history that surrounds Haiti, and particularly, of course, like Haiti has a long history of slavery and then freedom from slavery.
The first ever country where slaves earned their freedom.
Yeah, successful slave revolution.
Yep.
And but they've had to pay a bitter price for it ever since, really. And with what you're talking about, like this idea of like, it's that creating dependency where, I think the word that's been used in modern context now is like a kind of neo-colonialism. Like you're just keeping them dependent on you to serve some sort of economic social benefit. Whereas like, there are people who genuinely go out and like sacrificially like feed the hungry. And there's like really good NGOs out there, no doubt.
Yeah.
But like, then you see others that are exploitative.
Yeah. And like I said, for any person who's involved in this kind of work, this is the constant discernment, because like you do not want to be adding to the problem, right? Like the whole reason of going into this is because you wanted to make a positive impact and keep people. And so like, even for us, like we were educating kids and we were feeding them, but like there was, 7 years after doing this, there was this realization. It's like, are we actually creating leaders? Like, are we forming people to have character? Are we forming people to become like integrated, to have integrity, to make like hard decisions? Because, right. Like if you think about the situation in Haiti today, it's like,
it's worse than ever in some ways.
And you almost can't blame the 16-year-old boy who joins a gang, because he joins a gang for safety and security. Like his
what does education provide for him, right?
His needs are taken care of if he joins the gang. Yeah. And so it's like unless you really help form people to make those difficult decisions of realizing that, no, like I have to do this the right way. I have to earn my living the right way. I have to feed my family the right way. I have to take care of the community around me the right way. Like that's hard. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot more effort than just like sending some money to a school, paying for them, and feeling like, but
I did something.
Yeah,
right.
And that's where we were at for many years, and recently we're like, no, like we need to go further. We need to make more of an impact, and so it's hard. It's hard.
You guys started offering skills training a few years ago, I think.
Yep. And right now, one of our big efforts are after school programs, because, for a lot of families, the reality is like, the mom or parents in some very few families are working till dusk. Yeah. And so these kids go home from school. There's no one waiting for them there. Right. And for us, I mean, at least for me, like my family was my social anchor. My family was where I learned a lot of informal education. Right. You learn math, science, English, all that kind of stuff at school, but who's going to teach you generosity? Who's going to teach you respect? Who's going to teach you to, take care of the environment? Who's going to teach you to do all these things that, school is not going to teach you? Right. It's your family. And if they're not at home, and no fault of their own, because they're just trying to make enough money to put some food on the table, like that's a significant learning that's lost. And so part of the aim of our after school programs is to fill some of these gaps.
Yeah, I think why education, especially in countries like Haiti, is so important is because the hope that it brings. You're saying to this child that, hey, I know you can't earn, you could be working out, you could be, going out and working, you could be earning a living for your family. But we're saying, no, what's most important is your education, the potential that we see in you. Right, and the hope that brings to that family. And that, I think, is so much more valuable than what anything else can bring, because that is what I'm saying. I'm seeing the potential in you. And so even as you're sharing, like 7 years from now, we don't, we're assessing the leadership. It's like you're assessing hope, and, you can't put a measure on that. So I think that the hope that education brings to each child, that seeing the potential of this child could be a leader in society, and taking that risk on that child, and the hope that brings is worth anything that we could pay for, I think.
Oh yeah. I mean, you're saying to a kid, like, you have a future, and it's worth investing in.
Exactly.
Like, not just like financially, of course, but like the effort that's involved. And like you alluded to it, it's a lot more effort to kind of guide a child through education than to hand out a meal. And I don't mean to belittle people who do that. It's obviously important. But the reality is, like, it takes a long time to get a child educated.
Yeah, and that's why I think education is a right in the church, right? Yeah, it is a right, because, this child deserves to be taken a chance on so that he could form to the full potential that he's created to be, whether it's through forming his mind, his body, his soul, everything. And every child deserves that. And so I think that's why it's important that, I think, in one way when we tackle poverty alleviation, although we don't see the immediate results probably through it, what education brings is hope and that chance that you take on this child who would become a potential leader in society. So
yeah, I mean, one of the best examples is like the place where my parents are from, the place where you grew up, like Kerala. And it's a southern state, southernmost state in India. And, if you look at Kerala today, you see this, one of the most prosperous states in India, where there's almost like 100% literacy rate. There's so many things that are grooving and moving for Kerala. But, it was literally in the 1960s where the prime minister of India, Indira Gandhi, said, I'm going to give up my daily ration so I could feed the hungry children in Kerala. Like, the situation was dire in the 1960s. But, for me, one of the biggest inspirations was Saint Chavra Kyriakos. So he... do you guys know much about him?
Yeah, maybe you could share a little bit for our listeners about Saint Chavra.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he's this state, he's actually he's a saint from actually very close to the place where my parents grew up, like in this area of Kerala called Kuttanad, which is like by the waters and stuff like that. And so he became a priest at a time where, right, like you have to imagine India at that time is like the caste system totally rules, right? So the untouchables, the Dalits, are at the very bottom of society, right? There are Brahmins, and maybe the Brahmins are like high caste Indians, right? And they might have access to education, but, right, like there's such a massive disparity between what the high caste has versus what the low caste doesn't have. And it's in this context, this is the 1860s, right? It's in this context that St. Chavra Kyriakos, right, like he just was a visionary that was so ahead of his time. Like the first thing he did was he started a printing press, right? Like just imagine the 1860s starting a printing press, like, and he started the first magazine in Kerala, like it's called Deepiga. And that was, right, he would author stuff, he would write, like he was famous for writing these things, like in Malayalam they're called like chavarugal, like little sayings that people can learn, that like families can say when they're in their homes, like during night prayer and all that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, like he was insistent that like, all right, if you had a church, you needed to build a school with it. And that became so prominent that in our language, Malayalam, like the name for school today is Pallikudam.
There you go.
Right? Pallikudam, which literally translates to like with the church.
With the church.
Like that's how essential educating children or educating people was for human dignity. Right? And not just that, but he introduced the midday meal, right? All of the students were hungry. He realized like they needed food if they were going to be able to like study properly. And so he introduced like a midday meal at school so that the kids can at least have one meal a day. And on top of that, like pioneering women's empowerment, like making sure the little girls had an opportunity to go to school, that low caste Indians had a chance to go to school. Like it was almost 100 years later till the government actually started, like where you see the big shift in India, because basically what happened was the government of India started funding these private Christian schools,
right, making them into social services, basically.
Right? And so like for someone like that who's from like a very simple background to really be on the forefront of thinking like how can I help fight for the common good, right? And do that through education, through feeding children, through like empowering people who didn't have an opportunity. Like for me, like when I first thought of this idea of Lumen Vitae, I remember like going to his ancestral home in India and just visiting there, and like him talking about how much education was like light in the darkness.
Yeah.
Right. And so,
No, I agree. And I think, it's there's plenty of evidence for that too, how education, advances your skills in math and science. That leads to increased job opportunities, that increased GDP, decreased mortality. So there's plenty of evidence for that too, of like, if you invest in education long term, you will see results. And it is, in fact, a way of alleviating material poverty for sure.
Yeah, and one thing I was thinking of as you were sharing, Brian, is so I visited the shrine of St. Kuriakose, and not very far from the site of the church is one of the old schools that he built, and it was the first Sanskrit school, or school that taught Sanskrit to non-high caste Indians in Kerala. And it was, of course, a huge scandal because that was considered like a language only for the elite. But what I thought about as that came to mind is we have this idea of like education being a right, because knowledge is for all, truth is for all. And knowledge and education is not meant to be barred from certain people in society just because like maybe they are not, I don't know, like of a high enough social standing, or they make enough money. Like when you think of the poor in any part of the world, but we've been talking about Haiti, like they have no less right to a good education, to whatever they want to study, whether it's language or engineering or whatever it is, than we do. But we think of it as something that's like, when we don't take it for granted, there's people on the opposite side who kind of insist on this sort of educational elitism, like this sort of like academic elitism that like, we are we're a cut above, but that knowledge is for all. And that cultivation that education brings, as you mentioned, Anthony, that cultivation is for everybody.
No, and you'd be surprised. Like I've talked to priests. I mean, you guys are not monetized yet, right? Because this might get demonetized.
We can always put it on the cutting room floor.
No.
But I've like, it was a handful of months that I was talking to this priest, and he was kind of in like the central region of India, and he was telling me like how much he was trying to like educate, especially girls, because in that area, like girls were so much farther back than boys, and like how much pushback he was getting from the politicians who, were actively trying to make sure that people were not educated. I mean, even, when we read about like Malala and the girls in Afghanistan, like we don't realize like there's such an effort in many places to make sure that people don't get educated. Why? Because you can't control educated people, right? Like they know what freedom is. They know what truth is. They can learn. They can do things. But for many governments, for many places, like keeping people uneducated is an easy way to control society. And it's terrible.
They can't fend for themselves. They can't think for themselves. And I believe we might have talked about it on our show before, on the episode where we talked about origins of philosophy. But even when we call the liberal arts, the reason they're called that is because it was the education, the curriculum of it literally would have been freedmen at the time, because women didn't have that right at that time. But it was the education for people who were free. Like they were not tied down or bound to hard labor, to being off in war. And so they had at that time, the luxury of being able to just cultivate their mind and like study the arts and grow in technical skill. And so like, that's where we get the term liberal arts from.
Wow.
Yeah. And these days now, of course, like living in, a postmodern, post-liberal society, like, at least in most parts of the world, like we just take that for granted. Like that freedom that comes with those fields really is for everybody.
Absolutely.
And there was something else that we were just mentioning about.
No, I was just gonna add, like, and that, that's the whole point of education, right? So that, we get a chance to have that freedom to form our minds, to encounter the truth, to advance in our skills, and that's what educare, to lead out,
Right.
Comes from, is to, so that we are able to lead in a way. And I think that's why I see it as so important in elevation of poverty. But I also think there's also a risk of of education too. Like, you are taking a chance on this child, and ultimately you can take the child to the classroom, but it's on the child then as he grows to form his mind but I mean, that risk is worth taking for. And I think Father Giussani talks about this, the founder of Community Liberation, of the risk of education, that you bring the child to the classroom, but ultimately then the child decides what needs to be done with that. So I do want to touch on one other topic, Brian, on the importance of family in the child's upbringing, and and as a way of elevation of poverty. I know it's something you've been recently interested about it, and here in the United States, it's probably becoming an epidemic at this point, the problem of absent fatherhood.
It is
1 in 4 children. I think 2022 there were around 18 million children who do not have a father in their family, and we're seeing the significant impacts of it. Obviously, we don't have data from outside the U.S., but I mean, we've seen it in Haiti and in other places too, how the absence of a father in a household and how much that has an impact in children's lives. But I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that. And
the first thing I thought of was how in Haiti, just because of the sort of societal breakdown and just the severe poverty, many people don't even marry. Like, they don't even bother to get married. They'll just cohabitate when they feel like it's time. And like, it's, when I say this, I'm really focusing on the fact that, like, they just see marriage as just paperwork along the way. Like, they're not thinking about, like, the joy of marriage or like what it means to come together as a family. For them, it's just like, all right, we're together now, we're gonna just get this thing going. Like, it's very like, and then in that environment, to have children, already there's a sort of lack of awareness or ability to receive the gift of family life.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, if one of the parents or even both of the parents are missing, then how much more so? And like, I don't know, did you see that effect very much when you have, like, as you've worked with Haitians?
I mean, the interesting thing is, when I went to Haiti, I thought, oh my gosh, this is like an epidemic in Haiti. And then as I started traveling to more places, I realized this is an epidemic everywhere. Like, it's actually not Haitian at all, but it's an epidemic here
in the U.S.
Yeah, in the U.S. I mean, recently I visited a few South American countries, and you saw it there too. And it's like, man, like, the odds of and it's funny because I remember a good friend in Haiti telling me, like, if you want to make it, you need a mother and a father.
Wow.
And end of statement, right? like that's all you need to make it. Like, as long as you have two people in the picture, like, the odds of making it just like exponential. And it makes sense, right? Like, as a married person with kids, like, the worst is like when your spouse gets sick with the flu, and then you have to take care of your kids for like a week by yourself, and you're like, oh my gosh, how does anyone do this? Like, this is so difficult. And then to think that, like, there are people doing this day in and day out, and I mean, that's like just me missing my wife's like physical presence, like, with helping with stuff. But then I can't even imagine, like, having one income, and like the harsh realities that people have to go through. And it's crazy. What really is crazy, if you look at the data around, like, juvenile incarceration and fatherlessness, like,
basically directly correlated.
Yeah, it's like more than 90% of kids that are in juvie, like, do not have a father at home.
Yeah, even like mental health, behavioral problems. It's twice as likely in a single parent family than in your family with two parents. So I mean, it's significant, and I think the value that a father brings in a child's self-esteem, in his dignity, or of both parents being together is immeasurable. It's immeasurable what both, like a father and a mother, can bring in the life of a child. So yeah, I think, you know, even as we're talking about elevating poverty, I think the importance of having, you know, both parents in the family is a significant way of that as well, and how we can, our role to bring to be witnesses to that too.
Right. And a lot of these things, they have a lot of synergy with each other. They tend to play off of each other. Like when you cultivate a child's mind through education, you know, that child's personality usually gets cultivated along with it. And you teach a child about his or her personal worth, and that tends to radiate out into their friendships and communities and families. So, you know, all these things like build on each other. It's like it's a snowball effect. Like it was a snowball effect on the way down, and it's going to be one on the way up again. So
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Sometimes I think like with my own kids, you know, how much it would be like so challenging or so difficult, like for them without, right? Like, I think sometimes when I say this, like women get up in arms because they're like, oh, like, how come you're just talking about like fatherlessness? Like they need moms too. And it's like, duh, like, you know, like without our moms, we don't survive. Like
we don't get born.
Not just getting born, but it's like
nurturing upbringing.
When my kids don't have my wife, like it's just nuts, you know, like I can be there and I can do things, but like moms are almost like necessary for survival. I know that that's a little exaggerative, but I think the reason why I want to talk about fatherlessness so much more is because like there's such a, I don't even want to say tendency, but maybe it is a tendency like in men to sometimes like devalue that incredible responsibility that we have to our children, and I don't think people do it intentionally. You know, like, you know, I come from like a South Asian background. I'm Indian, you know, and you know, you guys know, like I help with retreats. Like the most tragic thing is like when I go to the retreats, and like sometimes we ask like kids to like, all right, you know, can you share, like these are teenagers, like can you share something, and they're like, yeah, you know what it's like growing up with an Indian dad. And then like the next 5 people say the same thing, and it's like, wait, like having an Indian dad doesn't have to suck, like, you know, like, and so these are people with their dads in the home, but like for them it's like almost such a like a predictive thing that, hey, my Indian dad is going to be not present in my life, or not interested in my interests, or not caring for me.
Not
like
gonna say I love you.
Yeah, and it's just like, yeah, I mean, there's people who don't have fathers, and like that's incredibly tough. But this is also like terrible. Like,
yeah, it's another absence.
Yeah, and it's just like the more that we as men can, you know, like, I'll be honest, like, you know, like I love Lumen Vitae. I love the mission that I do. I love the work that I do. I also love just being with people. I love playing games. I love playing sports. Like so many things I love. But there's nothing in this world that comes close to the way that I love my kids. Well, yeah, there's my love for God, which trumps that. But like after my kids, like the way that I love my family is like, it's so hard to explain to people who don't have kids, because it's like, you know, you take care of someone else's kids and you're like, yeah, you could love them for like an hour or 2 hours, or maybe for a weekend at most. But at some point,
or till they cry.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're going to be like, all right, I'm good. Like, you know, like we're their parents.
Glad this isn't my problem.
Yeah. But with your own kids, you just look at them and it's like, they could be driving you insane. But like the way that you love them and care for them is so profound. It could only like just like, if that's how much I love my kids, I can't even imagine how much God loves us.
Yeah, it is an image of the father pouring himself out to the son, right? And the son receiving that love. And it's exactly what, you know, you experience as a father. It's the fatherhood that you're experiencing, of pouring yourself out to your children and your children receiving that love. And it is an image of the Trinity, you know, it is an image of who we are as Christians. So yeah, I can only imagine, you know, how much, you know, I can't imagine what that for a family with a child that doesn't experience that. you know, the self-esteem that comes from you know, having that love and pouring yourself out to your children, the dignity that he gets of your gaze of a father on his child. It's like, it's profound. You can't measure that, you know, in many ways.
Yeah. And there's a unique calling of fathers to, you know, to be affirming to their children, to their, you know, their mission is in part to affirm their children, as I'm sure you know. Yeah, even as you were sharing, Brian, I was thinking of this beautiful story that a friend of mine shared, where his daughter was just screaming and crying, and it was like a problem that was going on for like days and weeks. And one day, like, he just was sitting by her as she's screaming and she's trying to go to bed, I think, and then he's looking at her, and there's like so much anger and frustration in him, but like something in that moment just, I don't know, just clicks in him, and he just is like looking at her and loving her, and he just starts crying, and then like she sees that dad's crying, and then she stops crying, and so eventually, you know, she asks, you know, Dad, Daddy, why are you crying? And then he says, like, just because I love you so much. And then, like, for the next like 3 days, she was just going around the house telling the rest of her family, like, my daddy loves me so much. And like, it doesn't have to look clean.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to look orderly. Like, sometimes it is going to look messy like that. But the fact is, like, she held on to that like for days, and probably for forever, in some way or another. Like, this calling of a father to affirm. And, you know, I think we all have, like, when we have experiences like that, they stay with us for a long time. I can think of experiences like that in my life. And, you know, imagine not having that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost coincidental that we're doing this on the feast of like St.
Yeah, I was
Joseph.
thinking about that.
It's like, you think about his position is like, this is not even his biological son, right? And, you know, he trusts the angel, he trusts what God is saying, and he takes Jesus and Mary into his home. And just like, just to think about, like, you know, what those interactions were like. Yes, of course, Jesus is God, but like, you know, Jesus's humanity, you know, was formable, right? And you had to think like those instances in the wood shop when Joseph and Jesus are together, like the kind of lessons that Joseph is giving Jesus, what he's instilling into him, what he's pouring out into him. And it's like, every kid deserves that.
Yeah. And I think the Holy Father, you know, he always talks about this, you know, like, he talks about this to parents, is, do you waste time with your children? You know, and the importance of that, of us wasting time with people, with our children, and how much that brings the love of God to our children too. And I think even in that big, like, what is that moral therapeutic deism study, the single most important factor for a child remaining their faith is the witness of their father who loves faith. Wow. Yeah, and so that's like the single most important factor. If they see their father praying, they're most likely going to stay in the faith. So even in children, for them to encounter God, you know, if they have witnesses of that in their own family, they're most likely going to stay in God, because they've experienced the love of their parents, and that's the experience of the love of God, and so they want to do that. So yeah. And
there's so much more we could say about like this particular element, but coming back to, like, tying it back to education, like, I think it really shows how, I'll call it a holistic, personalist approach to education, like how much it really enriches a person. Because a lot of what we're talking about with fatherhood and the experience of its presence, its absence, a lot of it is like the child just being alongside dad and just doing things and like learning through kind of monkey see, monkey do. And that is a form of education also. And when you situate that in the context of education as a whole, like, you see how it also goes the other way. Yeah. Like, an educator who maybe there's a temptation to feel somewhat detached, like, an educator actually takes on a kind of mentoring role. Absolutely. And it becomes more parental as the relationship grows, I think. So there's definitely a two-way street there between education and
family.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Thanks, Brian, for sharing with us and all the work you do. I know Lumen Vitae has some exciting stuff coming up. Do you want to share with us a little bit and with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, so from March 25th through April 30th, it's our big campaign called Race for the Light. So we try to just let people know what we're doing, bring a lot of awareness, get people to also, it's a competition, right? So like a steps challenge. So a lot of people have like smart watches or phones and stuff that track your steps. And so, I think people love competition. People, it being springtime, want to start getting active again. And if you could do all that stuff in community on teams and at the same time bring awareness to our mission in Haiti and hopefully collect some funds so that we can help go further in what we're doing in Haiti. So right now we have these kids who are going to school, like 1,450 kids in all these different states, and we're running these after school programs. I mean, one practical problem is that the cost of food is increasing. Like we know how expensive eggs are here. Just imagine what it's like for an island country who has to import all of their food. So the cost of food has gone up significantly, and so we're trying to keep up with that. And then on top of that, with the invention of things like Starlink, I mean, it totally changed what we do, right? Because of the danger, like I haven't been able to travel there the way that I used to, but now we're able to have like high-speed Wi-Fi in all these rural villages that never even dreamed of the internet. And so like what we'd really love to do in our next phase is, start building computer labs for them so that they could connect to the internet, right? Which is something that's foreign to them and just learn, right? And God willing, we can try to do like tutoring sessions. We've done that in the past, but like to be able to teach people online and then God willing, when things open up, go and visit them. I mean, that would be beautiful. That would be incredible. So we have a lot of dreams, and we really feel like God has been blessing us, right? And God has given us this capacity to do the work that we're doing. And so we would love for people to just join in the race, compete, raise some funds along the way and have fun. And yeah,
beautiful. Yeah, and we'll put the links for both Lumen Vitae and Race for the Light in our show notes. And Brian, thank you so much for being with us and the work that you do. And we'll keep Haiti, especially in our prayers, during this difficult time as well. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah,
it was fun. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the In Spirit podcast. In Spirit is an initiative of Amoris Christi, an apostolate dedicated to lay spiritual formation. For more information and to keep up to date, you can visit our website at amorischristi.org and follow us on social media.